Hey, how's it going? Hey, what's good, my nakama? Nannu des, and today I'd like to talk with you a little bit about blackjack. Not to be confused with the game, weapon, or pizza company of the same name, blackjack is a manga that was written in the 1970s and 80s by the legendary mangaka Osamu Tezuka, aka the god of manga. Though he really should have been called the god of anime, but whatever. While Tetsuwan Atom, aka Astro Boy, is probably his most well-known work over here in the States, most would probably regard the unfinished Hinatori, also known in English as Phoenix, as his masterpiece, including Tezuka himself. And don't get me wrong, it's a phenomenal read, but for my money, I gotta say Blackjack is his best work, hands down. Now, there's a number of reasons for this, but more than anything else, I think what really does it for me anyway, is that it's the most quintessentially Tezuka manga, as it finally gave him a good excuse to flex that medical degree that he had earned years before. Now, that extensive medical knowledge he was able to draw from, along with the intimacy with which he was familiar with the internal workings of human anatomy, gives the piece a real solid foundation and authenticity, which more easily allows for the suspension of disbelief when the more science fiction-y and fantasy elements arise. Now, I know none of my loyal viewers would ever disrespect me by watching a video in which I use my love of nerdy things as a flimsy excuse to evangelize my personal political beliefs without first familiarizing themselves with the complete catalog of all of Tezuka's works. Yes, even Kaneshimi no Belladonna. But, on the off chance that you're some kind of normie, let me hit you with a quick summary. The story of Blackjack focuses on one Kuro Hazama, the eponymous Blackjack. As an unlicensed rogue doctor and surgeon who is willing to use his godlike skills for any client, as long as they're willing to pay an outrageous sum of money. But don't get it twisted, my man Kuro here has a heart of gold and will frequently waive his fees, especially for the right patient. In fact, one of the most interesting and thought-provoking elements of Blackjack is Dr. Kuro's detailed, intricate, and rigid personal philosophical code. While I certainly can't do it justice in the short video here, if I were to sum up his philosophy, it'd be something along the lines of, life is inherently valuable. Regardless of individual circumstances, a doctor's first priority should be to keep their patient alive, at any cost. Now, Blackjack might seem simple, even primitive by today's standards, what with how short the stories are and the goofy, Disney-inspired character designs, but don't be fooled by how fast and easy it is to read. Like Onions and Ogres, Blackjack has layers of depth and complexity as it deals with a host of mature topics and themes including race and gender, sexuality, environmentalism, war, but most importantly for the topic of today's video, as I've alluded to previously, it also delves into the quagmire of medical ethics. And while I'd love nothing more than to discuss all of the interesting little juicy bits that can be found in the manga and the subsequent anime adaptations, I'm not here to review all of Blackjack media, at least not today, so let's instead focus in on this concept of medical ethics, which I believe is best exemplified with one of the few recurring characters of the piece, that of Blackjack's ethical nemesis and business rival, Dr. Kiriko, aka the Doctor of Death. The Doctor of Death. So, what's the big fucking deal? Why am I bringing up this Kiriko guy anyway? Well, it's not just because he's perfect boyfriend material, although, don't get me wrong, I ship the fuck out of Kiriko, and it's largely because of this smoke show. But no, it's actually the way in which he is really the perfect antagonist for Blackjack. You see, in Kiriko, Blackjack is confronted with his own inverse reflection, the antithesis to his thesis, if you will. One who believes that a dignified, peaceful death is preferable to a life of constant suffering. Now this, of course, is an anathema to Dr. Kuro, and even the mere presence of Dr. Kiriko is enough to shatter his normally icy calm demeanor, turning him into a fiery zealot. This unique character dynamic between two competing avatars of contradictory ethical perspectives is hands down the best part of the series, at least in my opinion. Now look, I know I'm polishing his knob pretty hard here, so let me back up just a little bit. Kiriko ain't perfect. In his moral certitude, he's probably a bit too zealous, too quick to turn to the mercy of euthanasia without fully exhausting all other avenues first. But, see, here's the thing. No one is more aware of the potential shortcomings of their beliefs than Dr. Kiriko. In fact, in a tragic twist of fate, after helping his long-suffering father pass on, he finds out, all too late, that he actually could have been saved. It is at this point we discover Kiriko's capacity for human error. Though greatly skilled like his counterpart Dr. Kuro, they are both deeply flawed human beings, capable of unintentional malpractice among other ills. But even though he's made his mistakes, ultimately the decision to die peacefully always rests with the patient. And while the manga frequently frames him as an obstacle to be overcome, it is clear that Kiriko would never force his treatment on the unwilling. But enough Kiriko apologia here. The stage is now set for a great debate. Both participants admirably repping their respective philosophies that each have their own respective merits, informed by personal experience. In the case of Dr. Kuro, it was being saved from the certain death of a tragic accident by the medical skill and tenacity of a doctor who refused to give up on him, even though other doctors had already written him off. And in the case of Dr. Kiriko, it was the relief and joy he was able to give his hopelessly wounded comrades that caused him to view euthanasia in such a manner. Although, I should mention that in the most recent adaptation of the story, which would be 2015's Young Blackjack, Dr. Kiriko's first death with dignity was performed on his Vietnamese lover, Hoa, who suffered chronic pain from a terrorist attack committed by the United States military. But either way, regardless of the specifics, both men have a deeply held conviction born from personal trauma, which, as a brief aside, I gotta say, is some damn good storytelling. Rather than relying on some arbitrary narrative convenience for their beliefs, much like in real life, it's the people and events that they've experienced that informs their current behavior. Some fucking good shit, man. Choice. Good shit. Delicioso. But anyway, we've got some good drama here with the clashing of two opposing ideals. Something of a dialectic, if you will. But what is the synthesis of these two competing, mutually exclusive practices? What are the social and moral obligations of a doctor or surgeon who's trapped in the most hopeless of situations? So, my notes here say, come out strongly in support of euthanasia.
What is
a quick way to end a first date?
We're going to take our second break.
Are you insecure in your masculinity? Here at Fort Wrangler Mike Rowe, we're more than happy to take advantage.
So it's time for some real talk. My grandfather died from complications caused by Alzheimer's disease. In case you didn't know, Alzheimer's is a neurodegenerative disease and is the primary cause of most forms of dementia. Life expectancy after diagnosis, regardless of treatment, is usually less than a decade, and for some people a lot less than that even. And just with full candor here, it is a fucking terrible way to go. At the end, you forget how to walk, how to talk, everything and everyone you've ever known or loved. It's frankly difficult to imagine a worse way to die. Hurt, scared, confused, ignorant, and deeply alone. It's also hereditary, meaning that barring a future cure or an early death, that's my fate too. His passing has given me a lot of things to think about, and with almost 2 decades of reflection, I know now with full confidence that should I ever receive that dreaded diagnosis that, well, shit, I was supposed to come up with some sort of quirky, fun, jokey euphemism for suicide here, but looks like I couldn't think of anything. Wait a minute. Long hair, poor vision in the left eye, a preference for a death with dignity over a life of suffering, a history of military service, mysterious intensity. Oh my God, that can only mean one thing. I am Kiriko. I am Kiriko? Yeah, we all get the bit. Fuck me, I think this video is starting to implode on itself. Look, you might think I'm being flippant here, that I don't properly understand the value or dignity of human life, so let's cut the kayfabe shit for a little bit and get even more uncomfortably real for a quick sec. A few years ago, I had a family member commit suicide after a long battle with substance abuse and mental illness. This surprising and tragic loss was compounded by the knowledge that I've had similar struggles in my life with, addiction and suicidal ideation. If someone as successful as he was, someone who had lived such a rich and full life, supported by his faith in a higher power and surrounded by his friends and loving family, if someone like that ultimately succumbed to despair, what hope can I have? Someone who's alienated from faith and family, spent most of his life struggling with depression, against abuse, physical and otherwise, destitute and abject poverty. What hope do I possibly have? What hope do I possibly have? I'm not telling you this for your sympathy or your pity, and despite my doomerish tendencies, my life isn't all bad. In fact, I'm quite happy that I've chosen to continue existing. Nevertheless, I still feel that it's the right of every conscious creature that they should be able to terminate that consciousness if they so desire. Now look, of course I realize moral preferences are by definition subjective, but if morality is going to mean anything, forcing someone to suffer cannot possibly be moral. In fact, I'd even go a little bit further than that. Forcing someone to suffer makes you a monster. So, bringing it back to the ostensible topic of this video, what surprised me is that even among the anime and manga community, which, at least in my experience, which at least in my experience tends to skew more progressive, the reception to Dr. Kiriko from many seems to be quite negative and judgmental. In fact, many seem to regard him as an unambiguous villain. Well, looks like Professor Nannu's gonna have to learn him something, because the conservative moral intuitions they seem to be struggling under is, well, big surprise, completely back-assward. You see, Kiriko isn't the villain. Kuro is. Got him! You see, Blackjack violates the will of his patients receiving end-of-life care. He knowingly gives false hope to patients and their families, and just generally causes people to suffer needlessly. I mean, if that's not a villain, I don't know what is. One further wrinkle to chew on before we go. Japan and America treat patients differently. I don't mean they have different treatments per se, but rather the way they handle patient care is a little bit different. While principally, at least, Japanese and American people tend to agree that a patient should have the final decision when it comes to their, available treatment options. In practice, Japanese doctors and families tend to have more of a say over a patient's treatment than they would if they received medical care over here in the States. I mean, that is if they could afford that care. Am I right, ladies and gentlemen, and various non-binary males? We have fun around here, don't we? Oh, man. Be sure to sound off in the comments below about how the United States is a lot like Blackjack, charging exorbitant fees for basic medical care and torturing people who just want to die with a modicum of dignity. Remember, kids, while every civilized country on the planet offers free healthcare to everyone based on need, here in America, the land of the free, medical care is rationed based on the size of your wallet, and medical bills are the #1 cause of bankruptcy. I love it.
Terry Sharp is kind of a lollipop, the most expensive plant you'll ever see.
If any of the screenshots of the manga or the clips of the anime seemed interesting to you and you're not familiar with Blackjack, it really is great manga, and at least of the anime series I've seen, they're all, pretty solid. And, if you've got the money and the desire, you should, of course, pirate it. Why the fuck would anybody pay for media in 2020?